I go, I'd like to share a short story with you. One of a familiar character. Does anyone know who Anansi is? Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Anansi is a mythical creature with the face of a man and the body of a spider. Now, Anansi's stories originate in Africa, in the area that we now know as Ghana. These are the stories that traveled across the Atlantic to the Caribbean and later spread throughout across the world. Now, Anansi is known for a number of things. He's known for being very wise, very cunning, very crafty, and very lazy. And Anansi will do things to benefit himself, mostly. But there are times when Anansi will do one or two things that benefit the entire world, and this little story will help us with that. This story is called Anansi and Common Sense. Well, Anansi was a collector of all kinds of things. He collected shoes, clothes, cards, mangoes, and even on Sunday, he would go around and collect Sunday dinner from everyone in his village. Well, Anansi would only collect these things because he wanted to be rich. But none of the things he was collecting would get him that. So one day, while he was listening to some neighbors chatting amongst themselves, he realized that one was asking the other for a little bit of advice. Well, that's when it hit. Anansi knew that if he could find all of the wisdom in the world and keep it for himself, then someone would need to come to him to get a little bit of advice, and of course, Anansi would charge them big money. So Anansi went out to collect all of the wisdom that he could find. He went to the obvious places, the libraries, the schools, then he went to other places, like markets, the barber shop, to collect other kinds of wisdom. Well, Anansi first started to put the wisdom in a plastic bag. Well, like every other plastic bag and the ones that we no longer use, they would get a little bit of a hole and split in two. So Anansi decided that he would use a paper bag. And when he did that, the paper bag dragged on the ground and ripped in two. So Anansi decided that he was going to put the wisdom in a very large calabash, looking like a butternut squash. And its outside hardens to make it safe. He put all of his wisdom in there. When he was satisfied he collected all, he put it up in a tree. And when he put it up in that tree, Anansi had some trouble getting it. Why? Because Anansi was very small. He wrapped one end of a rope around the neck of the calabash and the rest around his belly. He tried to climb this tree over and over. 1, 2, 3, 4, boom. Anansi would fall every single time. And he managed to draw a crowd. All of his neighbors were standing in his yard, wondering if he'll ever make it up the tree. Well, that's when little Susie showed up. Susie was the cutest little thing you've ever did see. She was 5 years old, big pigtails, and she wanted to see what all the grown-ups were doing. She walked in front of all of the adults, looked at this tree, and saw Anansi hanging on for dear life. Well, she looked at Anansi and thought she had the answer. She said, Brother Anansi. Anansi wanted to know, why would this little girl ask questions? Does she not see that he's busy climbing the tree? She said, wouldn't it be easier if you put the calabash on your back so that you can climb easily and freely? Well, you remember that Anansi collected all of the common sense in the world, right? So how is it that this little girl could come into his yard and give her little piece of advice and make sense? Well, this made Anansi so upset that he decided to forget the tree. He ripped off the calabash and threw it to the ground. It shattered in pieces, and wisdom went for a ride. It went north, south, east, and west, and circled the world once or twice. So if you ever wonder, why is it that no one person has all of the wisdom in the world? I can tell you this. It was Anansi who made it so. Thank you.